You're listening to Inside Outside Innovation, episode 71. Our host Brian talked with Ken Skistimas, Director of User Experience at GE Digital. With previous experience at Salesforce and a family background in illustration, Ken has been in and around design all his life. He shared how his small team works on a wide gamut of project sizes and types. Ken also emphasized the value in leaving things a little raw when suggesting new products and how it allows customers to interact more honestly with the prototypes. Hey everyone, I'm Victory Clafter, the producer of Inside Outside Innovation. We here at Econic and the I/O Innovation Podcast want to welcome all of our new listeners and thank our previous listeners for tuning in again. If you want to find out more about what we do and why we're here, visit insideoutside.io or econic.co. Chat with us on Twitter at the I/O Podcast. Now, let's get started.
So talk to us a little bit about how you've seen the world of UX and design change and how that's affected the pace of innovation within an enterprise.
Sure. So, if you go back a few years, looking back to kind of when I started, user experience wasn't really deemed user experience yet. And, I think my first title was web designer, and at that point you were probably getting your wireframes from an information architect. And, it was sort of, you had the stuff kind of thrown on your desk and it was more of a make it pretty job. But over the years, I've seen that as user experience rose up and the connection to the customer has gotten more important. So that instead of looking at one page, you're looking at a flow or a workflow or now a product suite and being brought in earlier in the conversation, and that's something that's over the years, like little by little, you've seen that happen more often, to be brought into the conversation with the customer earlier and about, the business goals you're trying to accomplish and how UX can get you there. Definitely a two-way street. And I would say the one thing that's remained consistent throughout all the years is you've got to be collaborative and there's got to be a lot of communication, and that doesn't take any technology to do. It just takes getting up out of your chair and going and talking to some folks or reaching out.
That's so important. So maybe talk a little bit about your team over the last couple engagements that you've had and kind of what have you learned of what's working or what's not working in the world of UX and how are you applying that to new product development?
Sure. So I head up the Predix design system UI team at GE. For those people not familiar, Predix is a cloud-based Internet of Things platform. And basically what it allows you to do is monitor and log data from industrial machines like a wind farm or a jet engine or like a turbine in a power plant. And my team builds kind of all the UI primitives so that would allow you to assemble an application based on Predix. So what we have to do is, it's interesting about a design system is you're working across a lot of businesses. So as opposed to one product, which is, largely at Salesforce, I focused on Sales Cloud. Eventually, I contributed a lot to the design system there, but at GE, it's very different. It's a much bigger company and we're working across as a design system. We have to support use cases from aviation, and power or transportation. So that's where that kind of communication comes in as important. And I really see my team as a hub to kind of connect folks and facilitate communication, both, at a use case level for what folks are trying to do with the apps. Hey, by the way, when you're trying to schedule trains going out or you're trying to do your rounds in the yard, it's actually the same thing as, this other team over here is doing when they're out in the field. So let's get together and talk about that. But also at a business level, right? So we get that sort of high level visibility into what each team is trying to do, with their business goals. So we can communicate that too. So we have a lot of tools to, kind of at our disposal to make that happen. Some of it's as simple as, office hours twice a week, right? Where people can call in. We use Slack a lot to keep an open dialogue. And should note this is also not just the United States, right? We have teams, across the world. We're global now. So Australia and China and India. So you got to keep that door open to keep the conversation going.
So tell me a little bit about how the team works. So it sounds like it's kind of vertical in nature from the standpoint of your working cross industries, got to serve a lot of different masters at different times. How big is the team and how do you actually go about kind of tackling a big problem like, hey, we've got to talk to this new wind farm. How do we do it?
Yeah, it's our team itself is pretty small. I have 4 designers dedicated to the design system. And then we, probably have 8 developers that build the components and stuff. So we really have to be mindful about how we scale this stuff. A lot of times what we'll do is say someone comes in with a new requirement. Hey, we wish the design system did this. So we'll just, make the calls. It goes back to the communication again, gathering up the kind of representatives from the various business units and getting everybody together. GE is kind of famous for implementing, some of the lean startup mentality in terms of fast works and that sort of stuff. So we adopt that. We'll do sometimes we call it here a workout, right? Where you get together with the customer for a few days and try to work out the problem and use cases. So we do that in the design system team across all the businesses. So we'll gather everybody together, and a lot of times it'll be a short few hour workshop, or I did a series of them earlier in the year, just about different topics over the course of a few weeks. And that was pretty valuable. But the second part of that is you have to communicate that stuff out. So if we took that in and we took everybody's time, right, they have to see value in that too. And it also facilitates that communication. So keeping your documentation up on what happened and what you're doing in a public place that's easy to broadcast out is just as important as getting everybody together. And I found that pretty successful.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. A lot of corporations seem to kind of go into their hole and make feature requests and build it out and then go out to the customers and see if it's accurate. Versus it sounds like you bring in the customer fairly early in the process and almost have them dictate what are the feature sets or things that need to be built and then iterate from there. So talk a little bit about like how do you, obviously GE is a massive company and they've got customers from all different segments and things along those lines, but how do you actually identify particular customers to be involved in that process, and what's that process kind of look like as a customer advocate?
Yeah, so a lot of our customers are, for the design system team, internal, so to speak. So, it's GE Power or GE Aviation, right? However, we also connect with the sales team too. So we're getting that other information from our customers out there, actually, like on the front, right? Interacting what they need to close the deal. So we have kind of all these different avenues. And you start to pick up on the signals across that. If you hear the same thing from a lot of different places, you realize that's important. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, like, where's the biggest interest in terms of a business right now, and where are the biggest deals happening? Where are the most impactful customers? So we'll tend to turn our energy towards those. Not necessarily discounting the other ones, because usually what you hear from that big customer is very similar to what the other folks are asking for. But there's a lot of prioritization that has to go on there too. So we work pretty closely with the teams, prioritizing correctly.
So it's kind of a cross between some, like, trying to find those early adopters that can help the ones that are having the bigger pain points that you talk with first, then try to figure out if it matches across some of the more common set of customers that you have.
Yeah, and usually it will. It's
yeah.
I think when we got everybody together earlier in the year, I think a common theme I heard was like, well, we have our own business. How could there possibly be any similarities here? And after I finished that series of workshops, everybody was like, wow, we're actually more alike than I expected. So that was pretty gratifying. But again, it just goes to kind of like, hey, here's what we found here, or reporting back what you're hearing from folks, and then connecting the dots.
So that's awesome. So talk a little bit about how the process, once you kind of understand some of the scope that you're trying to do, how fast do you iterate? What's the process of actually getting stuff out into the marketplace, or what's the process of building out something? I know you've written a great piece on the web when you were with Salesforce talking about the power of sketching and that. So maybe talk through a little bit, like the tools you use, and how do you actually go from a sketch to something that's the customer can use, touch, feel in the real world?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of iterating, rough and fast, getting those ideas out there and putting it in front of folks. And anybody can do that too. One of my favorite things is to put a pen in the hand of an executive, and for a minute they're like, "Well, I can't draw." It's like, well, it doesn't matter. What's in your head? Let's get this out and let's validate this. And then all of a sudden you put the stuff up on the wall, and everybody's stuff looks awful, but it's all early stage ideas, so it's reflective of that. And then the ideas and the playing field is level, so you have a good conversation around that. So you start there, and there's a bunch of different methods for you. If you have everybody in the room, you can talk about it, or you can dot vote, or things start to bubble up a little bit. That's interesting, or that applies to my area too. Like, let's dig into that, and generally take that and transition into some wireframes, or you identify, you write down the workflow. That's pretty huge. A lot of people kind of overlook that. It's like, what's the end-to-end workflow here, and what are the goals the user's trying to accomplish? And that'll manifest itself in a series of wireframes, or maybe even a storyboard. We've been doing a lot of storyboards lately, where you back out and you're not even, the interface is secondary. It's like, what is the user trying to accomplish? And, it's even in a cartoony fashion. And those work pretty well too, before you even get into kind of the nuts and bolts of what's this thing going to look like.
That talking about the rawness of, sketches and that, I find a lot of times corporations that, they're almost afraid to get that rawness out into the real world because, again, they've got brand to live up to and expectations, and they feel a lot of pressure around that. But it seems like a lot of customers respond to that raw new stuff differently than they would a pixel perfect version that you've spent a lot more time and effort on. Almost like customers kind of sometimes critique the design and the prettiness of it versus like what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it's not just customers, it's internally too, right? So if you show up to a review with when you're product leaders or something like that, and you have a really early stage idea, but it looks really polished, everybody's going to jump in and argue about what color blue the button should be, as opposed to really vetting the idea, behind it. Now, it's interesting talking about how customers respond to the rawness. It's because you're bringing them into the process. If you should bring them something that looks finished, they're probably going to pull back a little bit. And, when you're doing research, you worry about hurting your feelings, so you always, when you go into a research, you're like, I didn't do anything, I don't have any commitment to this. Give me your honest feedback. But if it looks polished, people assume there's a lot of work into it, right? So if you bring something more raw as a sketch or otherwise, the door's open for feedback, and then the other person can pick up a pen and, mark it up or correct it. It's pretty clear. I would say there's a bigger advantage to bringing stuff more raw to customers. And we did, even back at Salesforce, we did research sessions with just sketches and customers. It was really interesting, different type of conversation.
So talk a little bit about your team from the standpoint of how do you get folks thinking, next level innovation, thinking outside the box, so to speak? Is that just part of the nature of people gravitating to that line of work? Or are there particular things you can use, techniques, et cetera, that, like you mentioned, bringing in management and that? How do you get those folks to kind of grasp this iterative, messy, more likely to fail kind of process than the traditional way of thinking about building product?
Yeah, well, I think there's a freedom that comes with kind of backing out. It's how you set the context of the conversation too. Like if we're working on something new, I'll make it clear. We're going to do a session here. We're going to talk about this. We have no plans to implement any of this right now. It's purely ideation. And usually that sets the tone pretty well for the conversation and gets them to step back from kind of the day-to-day of what's my roadmap look like? What am I shipping? How am I going to get this out the door? And, it's interesting to see people, their demeanor changes when you do that too. It's like, oh, I have some freedom to play with this. And it's interesting, as we've been doing a lot of work on a design system, I had a colleague reach out, and kind of explain it really felt from the day-to-day backing out. She's like, I really feel like an honest to goodness designer again, and I thought that was really gratifying. You just get out, get to back out, and there's some freedom there to kind of, explore what's in your head and talk about with other people. But that's setting the tone at the beginning and putting some rails on it is really important.
Yeah, it's almost like a different set of permissions you're giving them for that particular process. That's awesome. Anything else? Any final comments that you'd like to leave to our audience about different things they should be aware of in this particular space?
Grab your designers early and often. Make it a tight collaboration between product design, engineering, and sales, and you'll be surprised what comes out of it. You're going to see some magic.
That wraps up another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Ken for speaking with us. If you've got a topic or area you'd like us to cover, reach out and let us know. We'd be more than happy to answer your questions and get other experts like Ken onto the show to share their insights. Until next time, go out and innovate.